My name is Kevin Hall, Kevin, Hall, Hall. I'm 33 years old and I work as a manager at an insurance company.
My name is AJ Bess, just A and a J, Bess, Bess. I am a project manager in San Diego and I'm 37.
My name is Michael Gomez, Michael Gomez. I am 36 and I work at a grocery store.
My first experience playing D&D was probably about 23, 24 years ago at my friend's house. He had downloaded the PDF bootlegged copy of the game, and we decided to give it a whirl. And I just remember falling in love right away with just being able to use our imagination. Back then, didn't have the video games and things that we have now. Didn't have the Lord of the Rings series outside of the, Glenn Yarborough Greatest Adventure Hobbit. So your imagination was really restrictive to, the things you've only read in books because there wasn't a lot of film that helped you see, the worlds that you could create. So, but that was it. It was it upstairs in his room. And I remember vividly, we played it probably for about 4 hours nonstop.
My first experience playing D&D, unfortunately I can't be definitive because it was such a long time ago, but I believe the first time was at a friend's house in a basement, home game, and I fell in love with it. I know from day one, that's for sure.
How old were you at the time?
I was probably 13 or 14. Man, how is D&D different from other games, especially strategy games? I think the most standout element is the complete freedom that comes with it. I think every strategy game, including D&D, has parameters, but D&D's boundaries are so seemingly endless in comparison to other strategy games that keep you very neatly in a box or in line with the trajectory of even a character. D&D just doesn't work that way. You can literally do whatever you want. I think that's what drew me to the game in the first place.
I think the biggest difference is other strategy board games use rules as like a boundary or a guideline to what the players, like the limit of what the players can do. Whereas Dungeons and Dragons use them more, rules are more of guidelines to then catapult you into whatever you want to do. And the more creative the GM is, the more you have flexibility to be open world. Freedom of choice, where you are able to fulfill out what your character wants to do, more so than you could in any video game or strategy board game.
There's a lot of ways it can really differ. The fact that people can bring kind of like their own game pieces to the thing, they can choose what they want to play. The campaign, like the setting, so in a way the board is different every time you play. Even the GM can GM the same campaign, but it could be a completely different game because of the GM. Even the players. I mean, there's so many different options and variables and all that stuff. But it's great. I love it. So that's why I think how it differs mainly.
Probably one of the most memorable moments playing D&D was the first time playing D&D. I had made a gnome ranger, and I didn't know that much about the game. I didn't understand how challenging certain enemies were going to be. And the GM, like a lot of stories, you wake up in a tavern, unsure of how you got there, drunk from the night before. It's pretty standard operating procedure for new GMs. And there was a horde of goblins attacking the town. And the bells were ringing, and he's explaining kind of everything that's happening. And I don't know what went through my head. I was just thinking, I need to create mass amounts of damage and panic against these goblins. And I took a oil lantern that was in my equipment. I was like looking through my equipment of what I could use other than, I guess, my sword or bow. And I decided to put the lantern in a pillowcase that I had from the room and get the oil dripping out, light it, and fling it out the window at a bunch of goblins. And having a GM open to that and not like that's weird, but being able to like develop the story around it was really empowering, and it felt really fun in that moment being able to make those type of choices. And that's probably one of my most memorable experiences. And I actually have a picture that I had an artist draw just kind of commemorating that moment, because that was the first time that I really fell in love with the game.
Back in high school, I had a paladin, and I had a buddy that played. I think they were still called blackguards. It's like the bad version of a paladin. And long story short, we always got teamed up for some weird reason by the gods. They made us team up and we'd fight something. We had to fight an ogre slave driver. The guy was a mega tank. He just took forever to kill. We killed him. I wanted the shield he had, and so did the guy I was playing with. And I told him he can have all the loot. I just want the shield. But he really wanted the shield. So eventually he won. He actually fought me for it. Long story short, I beat him in the fight, killing him. So I loot his corpse, take the shield, walk off, and then he asks me, "Hey man, you can bring my body back to be resurrected?" And I said, "Nah," because my character wouldn't have done that. He hates this guy. We only had to fight together because my god said I had to fight with him and stuff. But so yeah, we played. If your character dies, you had to rip up your sheet, and he was probably like level 12. He had from level 1. So yeah, that was pretty much the most memorable moment. Was me actually player killing someone and then leaving him behind to the point where he had to rip up his character sheet.
How mad was he?
He wasn't too happy with that. Let me just put it that way.
Gotcha.
What do I go over with the GM to ensure a respectful experience for everybody? I think that's a super important aspect to gaming in general. It's especially important in D&D because D&D is role-playing, and so I think that it's just important to know where the GM kind of stands on certain character activities. Because D&D is an open game that anything can happen, that means really truly terrible things can happen too. So some GMs have like certain rules about what people can do in a game, or language maybe that people would use in a game. That can be especially challenging if you're playing with strangers. So I think those are things that are important to do. If you're ever in a scenario where you're playing with strangers, I think it's a good idea to discuss with the GM or the other players where everyone stands on those types of things specifically, because it's all about everyone having a good time and having fun. And if people are in a position where they're not feeling comfortable or safe, then that's not fun, and that's takes away the whole spirit of the game. So I think those are probably the most important things to address before you're going into a game with any GM.
Things you go over, maybe a GM to players you should ask is like, hey, anyone have any fears, phobias, anything like that, any past experiences, or anything in general they can feel really uncomfortable with. It might be awkward if it's like violence, but it's kind of like, well, unless you're doing all talking campaign or something, but anything crazy, it's like, excessive violence or something like that, like torture, or, all that stuff. But usually, yeah, you just talk over your GM. Usually it could be a quick, easy, conversation about, what's, not people are not comfortable with and all that. Usually more of a factor when you're playing with, random people and all that stuff, because you never know what, people have gone through in the past and stuff, so.
I GM a lot, and so I don't necessarily have anything as a player that I try to put forward with the GM, but as a GM, I oftentimes will kind of just explain boundaries. I want the experience to be fun, but I want everyone to feel like they're having fun, and so there's certain boundaries you draw. As much open world as it is, you still want to respect other players, and you're not having fun if you're actions at the game table are infringing on someone else's ability to have fun. So anything having to do with language and actions against other players, actions against NPCs, certain things that as a GM I don't feel comfortable role-playing certain scenarios, obviously. So there are certain lines, there's times where we'll do, I'll do cutscenes as a GM and say, you want to do that, that's fine. I'm going to fast forward to when it's, when it's over and done with, because I don't feel comfortable GMing it. But I think it's just more important that everyone at the table has fun, and the way you can do that is just right out in the open, set some ground rules for how you like to play.
Favorite character I've made probably would be recently as a half-orc monk named Pulsum. he's a stand-up comedian, failed stand-up comedian. So yeah, he has to go on adventuring to make money, and then his excuse for going on adventures is for material for his comedy, but really he needs money and stuff. But he's a terrible comedian and all that stuff. He wears a clown outfit, like a sherbet colored clown outfit, because people laugh at him over it. So he thinks, oh, I'm funny, but really they're just laughing at him and stuff. But he's really dumb. He's really strong. He just punches his way out of stuff and all that. But yeah.
And what about them is different from your own personality?
For one, he's really strong, but personality-wise, he's really brash. I mean, not like in a bad way, but he's just very direct, and he's just probably a lot more outgoing and all that, aggressively and friendliness and stuff like that. But
honestly, it's actually a more recent character. I think as you play D&D more and more, you start to find creative ways to make characters that are very different from yourself, and you want to challenge yourself, because it gets very easy to, when you've made your 100th fighter, over the course of 25 years of Dungeons & Dragons, it gets very boring. So you always want to find a unique class or a subclass or anything. So mine's a character, Mirazar, who is a Dragonborn, and he's an artificer, which is basically like Iron Man, but with magic. And there's a lot of critical thinking of strategy and the things that he can create that are, making weapons into spell effects rather than just normal spells. And so it requires me to read up a lot on my character. What can I do? What can't I do? And also the type of race of Dragonborn he is kind of a challenge for me. He is very standoffish, very prideful, arrogant, high and mighty, which makes it difficult when you're trying to negotiate or persuade someone to do something you want them to do.
What about them differs from your own personality?
Well, first of all, they use magic. So, but I would say probably the biggest thing is just, I am normally somebody who tries to find ways for people to come together, common ground, and he's not that. It's his way or the highway. He, hates anybody who is less intelligent than himself. And it makes it extremely difficult to make allies and will cause, issues with players that you're playing with. And that's the thing about D&D that's so fun, is when you make these characters, it's not so much about what you want to do as the player. What would your character do? And there's times where, as a player, you're apologetic of, I'm really sorry, guys, but my character would have to do this. And that's what makes it fun and drives the story in different directions you didn't think it would go.
My favorite character, hands down, is a halfling rogue named Pocket, who is just a fantastic character and by far the most fun I've ever had with anybody. So...
well, for players, I would say, now D&D is cool. It's hip and people enjoy it in movies and TV shows. So you can find videos about it online. If you're a player, I would advise going on YouTube and just watching different videos about D&D and the classes and the races and the basic mechanics, so that you don't walk in completely blind. You don't need to go super in-depth as a player. The story is supposed to kind of just evolve around you, so you don't have to go crazy, but I would definitely spend some time on YouTube watching, GMs just walking you through basic mechanics. For a GM, obviously, if you're wanting to get into D&D, you've got to do the homework. And D&D Beyond is a great outlet that lets you do stuff online, but you still got to know the basic mechanics and rules. And that comes from just reading the rule books, reading different scenarios, and again, spending lots of time on YouTube getting tips and tricks from other GMs.
The advice I would give you if you're looking to get in D&D is find a game that you feel comfortable at, because you're never going to truly, I don't think, embrace your character and step into the magic and the fun that is becoming a D&D character if you don't feel comfortable in the scenario you're in. So if you're just getting into the game, make sure you're playing with friends. I wouldn't recommend going to a shop and jumping in on a game with strangers, being new to the game. So just because I don't think you'll have a good intro. So make sure you're playing with people you're comfortable with in the real world, because you'll feel more comfortable as your character. And that's really the only advice you need. I think it's good to go in as blind as possible and really learn as you go.
I would say for GMs, I would say learn to improvise, because you never know what can happen with the players you're playing with. If I can take any item from the D&D world, it would be a wand of wishes or miracles with infinite charges.
That is a great question, because so many options. Um,
I think the thing is the practicality of the item. That's not going to draw too much attention to yourself.
Was a Vorpal sword would be pretty cool.
Bag of Holding always comes to mind. It's one that I think every player can relate to because of how much it's like a pocket dimension, and so you can fit enormous amounts of things. You no longer have to worry about smuggling in multiple burgers and fries and shakes into a movie theater. You know, it traps the smells and stuff within. It's a pocket dimension. But practicality-wise, also, I think Ring of Invisibility. It's basically like the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings without the, off chance of some giant eye staring at you, and you don't have ring wraiths after you. But being able to be invisible is a great perk.
it's kind of a toss-up between a Bag of Holding or a Deck of Many Things for me. I'm going to go with the deck. Where do I feel most comfortable playing D&D? I am most comfortable in a home game, without a doubt. Even to this day, I've played in most scenarios, public, games with strangers, games in game shops, online even, but nothing beats a home game with your mates. That's the best way to play D&D.
Definitely in a home setting. I've never played at a game shop of any kind, and mainly because you can't control the environment there. I am a big supporter of making sure the environment's right.
Probably at my home or other friends' houses and stuff. You can just relax, and just have a good time, do whatever you want, and stuff. I can just take off my pants and play my underwear, and no one's gonna judge me.
I think the best way to get into character before a session is to really understand your character, read your character sheet, understand your abilities, understand your ideals and your bonds and your ties to other players, reading other players' character sheets so you can kind of understand how to interact. And then if you are making a character, you should always think about, model it after somebody you potentially know, or somebody from a movie, or somebody from a book. And then that allows you to watch or observe or read things about them that helps you kind of get into that type of character. But you want to make sure voice and relationships, those type of things play a big part. And the more that you put into your character, the more that the players around you will put into their character.
I like to get a little food in my belly, and I read over my character sheet. And I think the best way for me to get into character is chatting about my fellow players' characters. I like pre-gaming, especially if we haven't played in a while or it's a relatively new campaign. I like to really get the inside scoop on the other players if they're willing to share a little, what would you make, as far as class and abilities and things, and it kind of helps me get inspired about my own character. So the more I learn about my fellow players, it helps me get more into character. So I like to pre-game right before a session and really learn what I can. It helps me get inspired.